Today's episode will be a bit different. I've invited a friend and colleague of mine, Elin Stare. She is a licensed psychologist in Sweden. And with her, I will discuss some questions and subjects that I have been pondering about, and I think it's quite interesting. So today in media, we're talking a lot about the benefits and the risks with psychedelic-assisted therapy and with psychedelic substances. But what I see, we're mostly talking about the benefits and the risk for the individual and for the mental health in the individual. But I would like to discuss more the risks of the risks and the benefits of the context and culture in which the psychedelic substances are taken. So what does it matter how the psychedelic substances are introduced to us? What does it matter if it's like in an individual setting, like in an individual psychedelic assisted therapy, or if it's in a group setting with a retreat setting maybe in a potentially beautiful country? How does that influence the relationship that we develop to the psychedelic substance? And we will then also talk a bit about the term not so commonly used yet, psychedelic bypassing, which is much like spiritual bypassing. And we will also discuss guru-ism, which is about the leaders of these retreat groups, like what traits are important to have to prevent guru-ism. I'm also discussing with Elin about the Western society, the narcissistic, individualistic trends that can be here. So all of these subjects I will discuss with Elin, who actually has a lot of experience from psychedelic-assisted therapy, even though she is a Swede, and here in Sweden it's still illegal. But as I said, she is a licensed psychologist in Sweden, and she specializes in neuropsychology. So, she already knows a lot about the brain. And she is one of few psychologists in Sweden who has had training in psychedelic-assisted therapy. And she was one of the first therapists in Sweden's first clinical study of psilocybin, called PsyPet, at Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. And she also was a partner in and worked for 2.5 years as a facilitator of psychedelic retreats for the Swedish company Nysnö. And she now works a lot with psychedelic integration in her own private practice in Stockholm, and is also currently a lead therapist in the Compass Phase 3 trial on psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. And she also trains therapists in psychedelic-assisted therapy through the American psychedelic training company Fluence. So, as you can tell, she potentially has a lot to say about this through her experiences and her training. So I'm very much looking forward to this discussion with Elin, and I hope it will be mind-triggering and stimulating for you as well. Thank you and for listening, and I hope you enjoy this. Would you say that you are a person that learn through theory or through experience?
What a great question. I love this one. I would say both, but I would also say primarily I have led myself through that or down that path of learning through, leading with experience, always. Like I mentioned, I've always been very curious. I love sort of the interplay between theory and practice, if you will. And to dive deep into theory in order to understand or gain more understanding about an experience that I've had has always been a passion of mine. However, I want to recognize theory as a construction of reality and not as real per se. And I think also theory should be a helpful construction of reality, useful in some way. And if it's not, maybe it needs to be revised, updated, developed, learning from experience, tested and tried, so to speak.
Like in what way construction of reality? How do you mean?
Well, I guess I mean that theories aren't real. They're a way of trying to understand the world around us. And if they are useful, for instance, in some sort of application, for instance, in therapy, we can apply a certain model. That's great. But I don't recognize them as, sort of the primary reality or experience in
Right. So
itself.
would you say that there can be sort of a simplification also about some reality?
Definitely, yeah. I think they have to be reductionistic in nature because otherwise it would be too complex of a theory. But it's a very complex issue at the same time because, of course, our thoughts and our theories also influence how we perceive reality. So
Yeah.
it's very, very complex.
Yeah. But you have the theory in you as as something to come back to, or as some like a foundation in a way.
Yeah.
But then you also have to experience what the theory actually is about, and to learn also through experiencing the theory.
Yeah. And to be open to revising it also if it's,
Uh-huh.
if experience tells us that this doesn't really, there's a deviation here, it doesn't really fit. Rather than trying to make reality fit into a certain theory, I think we should update the theory, perhaps, if we can't make sense of it.
Is that why you're interested in research?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
What is psychedelic for you? How would you describe what it is for you, and like how do you view it?
Wow, that's a really big one. I suppose if I will take the liberty to sort of narrow the question down a little bit. So the way I view it in a therapeutic context, and this is just sort of one way of looking at it, is I think very much in the sense of, the classical definition of the word, that it manifests the psyche. That's what psychedelics means in Greek. So I think psychedelics has, under the right circumstances, it has the potential to do an important job that is usually the work of a therapist, which is clarifying and sort of reaching some sort of consensus around defense mechanisms, for instance. And that combined, by the way, that's oftentimes a very difficult job. And that can cause a lot of rupture and harm sometimes to the therapeutic alliance. It can be difficult. It needs a lot of timing and consideration. So with psychedelics, that part can sometimes be a work that is done more sort of inherently within the individual during the experience. And so combined with therapy, I think it has the potential to really augment the process, to make things visible to us that are sort of just around the corner or out of sight.
Right. Yeah, I often think of it as a microscope, like you have as a tool to see something that you otherwise wouldn't see.
Yeah. And that's really powerful because when it comes from within, when it's something that you see in yourself, it's a different thing from someone pointing it out for you.
Yeah.
And it can happen, and it happens in good therapy processes without psychedelics. But I think that's one way of viewing the potential of psychedelics in therapy. But then, of course, there are other ways. I mean, there are so many ways to look at this question, right? I think it also has the potential to make us feel more connected, to ourselves and to others, and for some people even to something larger. And that's something that's oftentimes missing in people's lives, and to create and induce a sort of sense of meaning. And that's also potentially very therapeutic.
Yeah.
So if I answer your question from the point of view of how is it useful in therapy, for me as a therapist, that would be part of it, I would say.
How do we walk around? This is also a difficult question, but how do we walk around the actual factor that we're bringing in something else to bring forth something in us that is already there?
I think so. What you're describing is the issue of sort of spiritual bypass or even psychedelic bypass And I think that's a real issue in the field of psychedelics. More so perhaps in sort of the underground recreational parts of the field. And what that is exactly what you're describing is you're using psychedelic or altered states as a kind of escapism, or rather than sort of learning something from these states and bringing that back to your life and making a real change, you're bypassing your personal real life potentially problems. And I think I've seen a lot of that. But I think perhaps not so much in psychedelic assisted therapy, because I don't think people who are on a bypassing path don't necessarily seek therapy. But I think that's an issue. And I mean, these substances are sort of non-addictive on a neurobiological level. However, they can be psychologically addictive, like you're saying,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
some individuals. Yeah.
So, in what way do you think we could get addicted psychologically to the context of that is in psychedelic assisted therapy or in psychedelic retreats? I guess the context would differ a bit there.
So, in what way we would become addicted?
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's the thing. You're kind of using these states to escape from something rather than to actually learn and integrate. And I think integration is key here. So what are you bringing back? What changes are you making? Or are you not making any changes to your life or dealing with your real life problems? I would say then that's a bypass. And I mean, in a way, it's like, and I think this is really difficult to prevent in a retreat setting, because as a retreat facilitator or a leader of a retreat, you have a very limited mandate. People come there to use these states to, whatever means they want to use them for. It's not therapy. You don't really have the mandate to intervene in that way. And also one other thing that influences this is the fact that these retreat centers are most often for profit. So that means you need clients to come and to fill the spots. And it's very difficult to say, to decline a participant if there isn't sort of a real risk, other than the risk of them not using this for the betterment of themselves or their lives. And that's also a difficult question too, to put yourself, to be the judge of that as a retreat facilitator. So I think it's hard to prevent in the underground or in the retreat business. In psychedelic assisted therapy, as mentioned, I think these individuals aren't as common because, to some extent, they're not really interested in, someone clarifying their perhaps problematic defense mechanisms or making real life changes. So they wouldn't probably seek out therapy.
So you would say that's the difference. First of all, the setting of a psychedelic-assisted therapy is often that it's an individual with some sort of mental health that's coming to seek help. So they are already there to, they want to face something in themselves and they want help and they want to...
Yeah, I mean, psychedelic-assisted therapy isn't... it's not approved in Sweden yet, so it's not used very broadly. My experiences are from research settings, but of course then people who come to these research studies have some sort of idea of it being a therapy, most of the time at least.
Yeah.
So that it also entails some sort of work, some sort of inner work or therapeutic work.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference.
So just that it contains the word therapy, it already there helps to prevent it bypassing or to prevent bypass or...
Yeah, potentially, I think. And then, like I mentioned, I think also as a therapist, your mandate is a little bit different. Even if these modalities, the psychedelic-assisted therapies, the protocols that are in use are very sort of hands off. They're very minimal and non-directed. So you're not really even sometimes called a therapist. You're called a monitor or someone providing psychological support. However, of course, if someone is doing, something harmful or on a path that you would see as potentially detrimental for them, that would be pointed out, I think, in perhaps a different way than necessarily in a retreat setting.
Okay, yes, yeah. So, because then you have like the relationship more one-on-one with the individual. So, if someone is seems to have another mindset or another intention of the therapy, or has harmful behaviors or harmful thoughts, then you would be able to point that out, for example, in the preparation already or in the integration phase.
Yeah, I suppose so. But then again, these are sort of broad generalizations. I haven't seen instances of bypass within psychedelic-assisted therapy. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. I would assume that's a possibility. I've seen much more of it in the retreat world, I would say, or in the recreational world, even spiritual, developmental contexts.
Right. So one factor being that the people coming there you cannot control in the same way their intentions on coming there.
Right. And it's not even, that's a different question. Should it be controlled?
Yeah, right.
In a sense, it's up to each and every one. However, I think psychedelics are oftentimes portrayed as this, or used as a way of, perhaps being a part of a narrative about yourself that is sometimes a little bit almost narcissistic. So being on a spiritual development path can be an expression of that, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
So in that sense, sometimes I think, individuals aren't really using it for development, even if that's the claim.
Yeah. So it's just it's just something that you use in order for you to stay the same, but to have something to point at. Well, I take a lot of psychedelics, so I'm very enlightened. And then I wonder about how it's portrayed in media, because it's a lot of sunshine stories. What do you think about it?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think the hype is a bit of a problem. I hope that we're nearing the end of the peak of that hype.
Yeah.
Because one thing that it does is it induces this belief in people that this is a quick fix, and that one trip will solve all my problems. And it's definitely not. One trip can be the starting point of something, like we talked about earlier. It can reveal things, patterns, things that you need to work on, but it's not the end station, for sure.
Yeah.
So, and I think, that is something I've experienced both in research settings and in the retreat setting, is people coming in with that preconception, wanting sort of a reset of the brain, or something other than, they've tried a lot of things, and this is, understandable. People are looking for solutions to their problems, but I think it's sort of uphill from there, in preparing people for this experience, because it's not just the experience, it's not just the dosing, it's so much more. It's a lot of work after that, potentially.
Can you say something about that, or say something more about the narcissistic journey that you said about? Mentioned.
Yeah, no, I think one issue with psychedelics in our context, in the sort of Western society, is the fact that we do live in a narcissistic time.
Yeah.
There's a lot
In what
of,
way? Like how
I think there's a lot of focus on us as individuals, our egos, and this is, of course, strengthened through the use of social media, etc.
Yeah, we should develop more, we should be better, and also as a parent, not just least to say perfect parents and give everything da da da.
Yeah.
It's like...
Yeah, just different ways that we focus on ourselves and our egos. And that then becomes the cultural setting or the cultural context in which we have these experiences.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why a psychedelic journey, if you will, or a spiritual developmental journey can become an expression of just that. It can become yet another way of projecting your ego out into the world. This is me now. I am spiritually developed. I'm enlightened, etc. And that's...
How can you say, how do you mean projecting the ego out to the world? Like what?
I guess what I mean by that is creating an image of yourself that is very favorable to yourself. This is how I want to be, and this is how I now am. But it's not really making any big difference in your life or for your relationships or.
So you mean doing all this work on yourself just to gain better version of yourself that you're showing to the world?
Yeah.
Like how that's the most important.
Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's the day and age that we live in a way. That's the cultural setting, and I think that influences. Regarding the sort of the psychedelic narcissism, if you will, I think, I mean, the jury's still out when it comes to research. If we're talking about, how do psychedelics affect narcissistic traits in people?
Yeah.
I think there is some research to show that it might reduce those traits.
Yeah.
And there is some research that shows that they're unaffected, and then there is some concern and some data showing that they may even cause some sort of ego inflation in some individuals. So I don't think the research is clear. I think in my experience, ego inflation and just, the inflation of these traits is a possibility through the use of psychedelics also. Yeah.
That leads me into another curiosity or another questions, like how do we do this in a safe way in groups?
It's a good one. One thing I could say about it is I think it's a shame that there's so little research on the group setting.
Yeah, why is that? Because since it's so widely spread, like with retreats in groups.
Yeah.
But the research is on individuals mostly, and on on that, with blindfolds and all is controlled, and with music and so on.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there is some research on groups, but that's sort of naturalistic research, so it's not clinical trials so much, looking at individuals with a certain diagnosis and looking at psychedelic-assisted therapy in groups. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to that coming more. But I think the reason is, this research is still in its beginnings in a way. And with a group, there are so many more sort of uncontrolled factors.
Yeah.
So many uncertain parameters that could potentially influence the outcome. And in clinical research, the way it's conducted today, you're trying to minimize all of the extra pharmacological factors. So I think in that view, the group setting becomes sort of problematic. Whereas my experience from working with groups is that the group can be a real resource.
Tell me about it. How?
Right. So I think there's a power in groups. And like you mentioned, of course, this can be a destructive power also, but I also think that it can be helpful. And we were talking about connection and how that's potentially...
How is it helpful? Like, what are...
Well, I think connection to others is something that can be helpful, and I think the group setting allows for that.
How is connection with others helpful for the individual?
I think that's a very good question. I'm not sure I have the answer to it, but I do believe that a lot of people feel isolated, and that a lot of suffering comes from being isolated, and a lot of sort of healing or repair happens in relationship with others.
Yeah.
And in a group setting, there are so many other individuals and so many opportunities in a way to have that repair happen.
Yeah.
In relationships, where you can sort of allow for your inner world to have its own course, your projections to come out, and things to be worked through.
And so then maybe that's a factor that, so when you can project your own inner world out there and among a bunch of people, and they are seeing it and validating it, like it can exist, you can share it with other people.
Yeah.
So then it gets reflected back, which might give you a sense of connection with yourself. That's how I think of the power of groups anyway, that it can help us to...
Yeah, that's one way of seeing it, definitely. And another way of seeing it is perhaps, you have more triggers in a way.
Yeah.
And that's...
so it's challenging, but can be beneficial then.
Yeah.
Potential for repairing.
Exactly. Whereas in psychedelic-assisted therapy, you might only have one person acting as your interpersonal trigger.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So that's one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But I also think there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to the group context and why it's helpful. Like I mentioned, we live in a highly individualized society, and I think sometimes the way I view it, that's also one of the root causes of a lot of human suffering. So groups, in that regard, may be healing or helpful just to be part of a group.
What would you say is important traits with a leader of a group?
I think the group leader, the facilitator, or whatever you call them, have a lot of power in terms of creating and fostering safety and facilitating that process. And I think one key thing in creating a safe group is to, I think, welcome and allow everything to be expressed, and to have a high tolerance as to how people would like to participate in a group. Whether they want to share a lot or perhaps less, or even, some people are very hesitant to partake in groups. And I think it's important to be, accepting and including of all wishes in that regard. I think it's important to be open to criticism, especially if the criticism is about you, or how you're dealing with the situation. I think...
Why is that important?
Well, you mentioned guru-ism, and I think one concept that sort of plays into that is culty social dynamics. And one aspect of that is how leaders approach or receive criticism. And I think it can potentially be a risk factor if the leader of a group is very sort of defensive, or even, just doesn't receive criticism well.
Yeah. Can that sort of, trickle down into the group norm?
Definitely. I think so.
In what way? Do you have an idea? So, like, how can the group form because of what they see in the leader?
This is a very complex issue, but I do think that the issue of transference and counter-transference is sort of amplified when we're dealing with psychedelics. So if it's a retreat group in a psychedelic retreat, there is the potential of people coming there, participating, and then having sort of, projecting a regressed version of perhaps an idealized version of a parent onto the leader of the group.
Yeah, wanting to be seen by the leader, for example.
Yeah, it could be, or just, coming there, like you mentioned, in a vulnerable state and wanting a perfect father or mother figure.
I'm going to be healed, or or omnipotent projection of that.
Yeah. And if then that projection is active, and the leader of the group is bad at receiving criticism, or very authoritarian in their way of dealing with the group, I think that can be potentially harmful, because you're in a very suggestible, vulnerable state, regressed states even sometimes. So your psychological makeup is maybe more that of a child at times during the journey. So I think it's very easy to be influenced by the leader.
Yeah. How important is it that the leader has gone through a lot of psychedelic journeys, him or herself? And
I don't think the psychedelic journeys in particular
No.
are what matters. I think there's a different kind of perhaps development that needs to be ongoing, I would say,
yeah.
to be able to do that work. Because, like I mentioned, if you are the recipient of those kinds of idealized projections, then what you do with that is so important for the group and for the participants. So if you're not aware, and if you sort of receive and accept that projection, which can be very, very tempting, someone is looking at you like you're perfect. That's very, very, that feels wonderful, of course. And if I then attach to that projection and start thinking, this is about me, this is really the truth about me, I think that's potentially quite dangerous.
Yeah.
And you start acting as if that's true. I am the omnipotent parent here. Then you're sort of not aware of that dynamic, and that can lead to culty social dynamics. It can lead to a dynamic where you're idealized as a guru, or someone who is more enlightened and spiritually developed than other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's the risk.
It sounds like you're saying that it almost seems more important for a leader to be quite flexible or quite open and quite humble. Relationship to itself, so rather than being very spiritually developed.
Definitely, I think grounded is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
And also someone who is constantly checking themselves, constantly talking with their peers, their colleagues,
right,
taking supervision, just turning every stone and seeing what's going on here, and being open to also, I might not be doing this perfectly, what can I do differently?
So in order to be that open to critique, you sort of have to view, I guess, critique in a way that it's more, that it's helping you and others, rather than like it's destroying you, and
definitely
you cannot welcome it.
No, definitely. It should be seen, I think, as a growth gift.
Yeah.
How can I learn from this?
What other traits would you say? What, like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it helps, and I think that generally helps, working with people and working as a therapist, is to be open to seeing the potential in people. I mean, there can be a certain naivete about, just mirroring the best in people. So that's not what I'm getting at. Of course, you have to be mindful that there are always different aspects to a person, but to have some sort of hope, I guess, that people can develop and grow, and, to adhere to that idea at least, I think is, at least for me, that has been important.
Okay, so to be able to instill hope.
Yeah.
In the group and in the individual.
I think so.
Which makes me think of what we talk a lot about in psychedelic-assisted therapy communities, the trusting the inner healing intelligence.
Right.
Like this unconscious force in you that wants you to heal.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about that when you're saying, like, to instill hope, like it's instill hope in the person's own capacity to heal.
Yeah.
And which I've heard you talked in another interview, you compared it to placebo.
Yeah.
Can you say something about that? Because I thought it was interesting, like how we can use placebo as a therapeutic tool almost.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I think that's what we do in therapy.
Yeah.
If therapy is working, then somehow the placebo is at play.
Yeah.
That's at least my understanding of it. I know might be contested on this, but I think as to this day, we don't really know what makes therapy work. Is it the therapeutic alliance? Is it, common factors that are common to different kinds of therapies and modalities? Or is it the actual interventions that we do based on a certain framework or theory? And I mean, I think the jury is still out. And to some extent, that makes what makes therapy work kind of a mystery. And placebo is also kind of a mystery. We don't really know what it is that makes us heal and grow and in that way, in that regard, even though we're not sort of given an active treatment. So I think therapy at least can be viewed in that way, as a way of unlocking that potential or that mechanism. And that's certainly one thing, sort of a take home from working in the psychedelic field that I have made, that I can bring this into my regular therapies. At least the awareness or the experience of I have seen this work. I have seen placebo, if you will, or the inner healer at play without me doing anything. So I don't have to interfere so much. I can actually sit back and relax and trust that, we just need to find a way here for you to find your way.
Right. So do you think your work as a therapist with sober clients has, got better after your experience with
I think
working
so.
with psychedelics?
I mean, I think so.
Because of this one is this factor that you're trusting more, or you're
it could
working
be
more with the timing of hope in the
it
client.
Could be, definitely could be. I'm not sure I have sort of the framework to explain it, but I would definitely say I have more trust in my regular therapies.
So isn't trust, to me that seems natural, that trust is such a key factor in growth. And in order to trust safety from coming from a fear state and starting to trust again, like that's a big step.
Yeah. And I think now that I think about it, just speaking from my own experience, where I've been in my personal development, I think at times where I haven't had the trust in myself, it has been so, just crucial to have had people around me that had trust in me. So I think that could potentially be one factor that sort of unlocks the placebo effect.
Okay.
And I think that's what working with psychedelics can really give you a view on. So this is possible without me interfering or leading the way. Then, that must be possible for others.
So when you've seen it through, with the help of psychedelics, like this process of a person starting to trust him or herself, or starting to work themselves, that made it easier for you to see when it starts to happen in a sober state?
I think so. I mean, I think these processes are so complex, and that there's a lot that we don't know about the placebo response. But I think somehow that's the realm that we're in when we're speaking about, how do psychedelics work? It can be framed in different ways. It doesn't need to be a black box. But at this point, I don't think we really know. And whether or not, conscious awareness of believing in a certain modality is key or not, I think that's one factor. But I think there are other factors to it too. But it's so interesting. It's very, very interesting. And it pertains to a lot of things in regular therapy, a lot of aspects and things that we can learn from psychedelic modalities when working in regular therapy, I think.
Maybe it's just my fantasy, but I've had the impression that we don't talk enough about placebo in Western psychology as a factor, or like it's only in research as like the bad thing. But I don't know if it's just my fantasy, but shouldn't we talk more about placebo?
No, I agree. I think it's been framed negatively due to the research paradigm where you try to minimize it to see, what are the sort of the real effects of a drug or an intervention. Whereas I think another way of looking at it that I find much more interesting is how can we use that effect to work to our benefit,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can we use what we know is actually happening, but to actually make interventions from it, or to help us guide the process?
How do we find tools to unlock that potential? Rather, should be the question. But that's not where the research is at today.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
How do you think, how can psychedelics and psychedelic-assisted therapy be integrated in the Western society in the most safe way?
Save the best for last. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could speak about what I think is realistic, and I could speak about what's safe. I'm not sure if they're the same. I think sometimes there's a tendency to view the clinical setting as more safe than underground settings or recreational settings, and of course that can be the case. However, I think there's, due to the fact that, for instance, if we're speaking about an over or above ground setting, once these treatments or modalities are implemented into healthcare, there will be some sort of oversight of, therapists or people with licenses. They will be accountable, or it will be possible to hold them accountable if something happens. There will probably be training and supervision and all those safeguards. So that is, that's good. But there are instances where people have experienced harm also in clinical studies. And there are many instances in, underground settings where things are great. So I don't think it's an easy question, what is safe and what is the safe use of psychedelics. I think it's not the same as saying it's above ground or it's underground. But the realistic way that these compounds will be sort of implemented into our society, I think, is through public healthcare in some way. I think they will be and should be used as treatments for certain, diagnoses or certain problems. And as of yet, we don't really know which instances these compounds or these modalities should be used. But we're getting there. And I think it would make sense to see them implemented into healthcare. And in my view, if I get to dream a little bit, it would be specialized clinics for psychedelics that take into account all these factors that are important, such as the setting. A hospital setting isn't necessarily the best for these kinds of experiences. It can be quite harsh, quite cold and clinical. And as we're, so influenced by the setting in these states, I think it would make sense to have a special clinic or a special setting for that. So that's one way. I would like to see them. I don't think it's realistic, but I would like to see also the avenue of them being available for use for personal development. There's a professor at Stockholm University called Per Granqvist, and he regularly speaks of this idea about psychedelic folkhögskolor, which is like it's a special thing in Sweden. It's sort of a college, a communal college of sorts, where it's not about traditional learning. It's not about didactics or learning subjects in that way. It's more about training to become a citizen, really. Learning about democratic values and actually practicing those is part of it, at least. And I think, that setting, it's not that bad of an idea, actually, to use psychedelics in a sort of semi-controlled setting like that. For personal development for individuals who are sort of in a transitional part of their life. I would love to see them be used also, in other life transitions available for use, sort of midlife transitions, or even approaching old age and death, I think would make a lot of sense. But that's me dreaming. I'm not sure if that will happen, but that's my hope. I think they have a lot of potential in those sort of potentially life crises, but also transitions. There's a lot to gain from psychedelic experiences in those moments in life. But I think the realistic thing is at least they will be implemented in healthcare in some way in the not so far future in Sweden, I think. It remains to be seen how that will be done. Whether it will be a very biomedical framework or more, perhaps a little different.
Okay. Yeah, so interesting and well said. Let's see what the future will bring. I like the idea of the psychedelic college.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to see.
Yeah.
But so thank you very much, Elin. This was really nice. Maybe it will become more times.
Yeah. It's really nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that's a wrap. Welcome back from watching the whole interview with me and Elin Stare, which I really enjoyed myself. It was very thought-provoking and stimulating, and I think these subjects are so important to think about, especially for us in the field, because it's such a responsibility for us to work with, people and their minds. And I think these questions are really important also for society as a whole. Like, how do we integrate this potent tool in the Western society, especially in a very safe and reflective and mindful way? And the way to do that, I think, is to have these discussions open. So I'm very thankful that Elin came and did this interview with me, did this discussion with me. And per usual, I'm interested in, what experiences you have of psychedelics or of the psychedelic world, or about guru-ism and what we discussed. If you have any thoughts about it and something you want to share, or just comment what you liked or what you didn't like. So please do. And thank you for this time. Stay tuned for more content coming up soon. Thank you very much.